Daf Memches Amid Aleph with 3 lines into the page. Amar Rav Yosef bar Menyume Amar Rav Nachman. Reya hasmucha l'doifen. So basically, you have a lung that when you're taking the lung out of the chest cavity, it's connecting to it's being stuck to the rib cage. It's being stuck. Sorry, It's being stuck to the rib cage. So now, when you have a sircha, an adhesion, it means there's a hole there, as the Rashi says. So that you have the lungs are adhering to the rib cage, that means there's a hole. Now, there could be a hole in the rib cage, which is fine, or there could be a hole in the lungs. So I'm not sure. So says the Gemara, if there are blisters on the lungs, then that's enough to be a problem. But if not, then we'll be makel. Meaning, in other words,
that happens a lot.
Yeah, meaning, right? So if there's a blister, then it's an issue because then it's a suffix deraisa. But if there's no blister, then we assume it's a svek sveika. First of all, it's a suffix whether the injury is on the cavity of the rib cage, and maybe it's on the lungs, but it's not a sign of a hole. So the point is, but if there's a blister and there's an adhesion, then that's a problem. Says the Gemara, Mar Yehuda Mishmei Davimi Omar Echad Zev Echad Zechaysh. I don't care whether there's a blister or not. If the rib cage and the lung are adhered to each other, that's a problem. Now, that doesn't mean that it's treif. It just means we got to investigate. So you have the lungs which are adhering to the rib cage. So we said that there might be an issue here. Again, maybe there's no hole at all. Maybe there's a hole. Maybe the hole is at the rib cage. Maybe the hole is in the lungs. I'm not sure. So the first opinion is Rabbi Nachman says that if there's blisters, then we have a chashash. According to Avimi, we always have a chashash. So what do? It doesn't mean you have to throw out the animal. Here's what you do. Heichi Avdina, what you do is like this. Amar Rava, Ravin Bar Shava, Sabrila. Ravin Bar Shava explained to me, Ma'isina tzakifra d'chalav pume. You bring a very sharp knife. Umefarkinale, and you cut the lungs from the rib cage. You separate them with a very sharp knife. And then you check. If you look and the walls of the rib cage are smooth, then we have a problem with the lungs. If the walls of the rib cage show that there might have been a hole there, then we assume that the hole developed by the rib cage.
The assumption is the hole.
Correct. Now, it says the Gemara, it doesn't help. And let's say there's no hole in the rib cage. That means that the hole obviously developed in the lungs. It doesn't matter whether the lungs give off air or not. Even if the lungs don't hiss and don't give off air, that just means that there was a hole that scabbed over, which is a problem. And therefore, if there's no hole, if there's no issue with the wall of the rib cage, we assume it's the lung an issue. Now, says the Gemara, Rav Nechemia Breder of Yosef Badalag B'Pshuri. Rav Nechemia Breder of Yosef would put it in a bucket of water. What does that mean? He's being machmer. He's saying, even if you find that there's a hole in the side of the wall of the rib cage, so we said before that means that the lungs are probably not the issue, he would still take the lungs, put them in a warm bucket of water, fill it up, and look for bubbles. So on the case where Rabbi Nachman is lenient, Rav Nechemia Breder of Yosef is machmer that you should put it in water to check. So I mean, he's being machmer now. He's saying before that you said it's makel. He's saying, I still want to check with water. So he's going above and beyond the letter of the law. So it says the Gemara, Amrle Mar Zutra Breder Rav Huna Breder Rav Papi L'Ravina. There's a lot of names today. That Rav Zutra says to Rav Papi Breder Ravina, Hadar Rav Nechemia Breder Rav Yosef Otuna Homa Sisala. We know that Rav Nechemia Breder Rav Yosef had this tradition that he would take a lung, and in a certain case he would put in a bucket of water to check for bubbles. Now, we said before, the first version is that it's the case where the lungs and the walls of the rib cage have an adhesion, but we check and there's an issue with the wall of the rib cage. So Reb Nachman said that we assume the lungs are fine. To that, Reb Nechemia Breder of Yosef is being machmer that you still have to put in a bucket of water and do the water test. The names. Mar Zutra Breder of Huna said that's your version of when Rabbi Nachman said to do the water test. We have a different version. Our version of when he said his statement that you have to do the water test was actually being super lenient. Meaning you were being machmer, that really the lungs are fine, and the Tanakama, the first opinion would say, you're good to go, just eat it. He's saying, no, do the water test as an extra level of stringency. He says, we have the opposite shita. We actually hold that he said the water test to be super lenient. What's the case? I'll say it out so we'll see it inside. The case is like this. If you remember a couple days ago, we said that if two of the lobes have an adhesion, not next to each other. Meaning, let's say these are the three lobes. If there's an adhesion with the two lobes that are adjacent to each other, we said it's fine. But let's say there's an adhesion connecting 1 and 3. So we said that's an issue because adhesions are a sign of a hole. And the two lobes are next to each other, that's an issue. Not next to each other, that's a problem. To that, Rav Nechemya Breder of Yosef said, just check it in water. Remove the adhesions, put it in a bucket of water. If you fill it up and no water comes out, that means the adhesions healed or it wasn't really a hole and you're fine. But if not, then it's a problem. Meaning, so over here, he's being super lenient. In a situation where we would say it's for sure treif, he says do the water test. So the first version is that he's being machmer. This version of his statement is that he's being super lenient. Now, the strange thing about his shita, what's hard to understand about his shita, is what does the water test do? In adhesion, according to Rashi, means there was a hole there. When the two lobes are not adjacent to each other and they're have an adhesion to each other, that means there's a hole. And they're both lobes of the lung. That means there's a hole in the lungs. In this case, at least, you have the lungs connecting to the rib cage. So you could always just posture, the hole's in the rib cage, which is fine. But in the second version of what he said, the adhesion, it's two lobes of the lungs are connected to each other. What's the point of checking the water? I don't understand what's the difference. Adhesion means there's a hole. Once there's a hole, it doesn't matter whether the hole's sealed over with a scab. It's still a problem. So this version is a little bit more challenging to understand. The Gemara points this out, that the Gemara is going to point out this is a more challenging version to understand. So says the Gemara, Anon Adarabba Masnisallah, we have his version on the teaching of Rava. Rava said, we had this 2 days ago, that if you have two lobes that are not adjacent to each other, that have a sircha, that have an adhesion to each other, it's treif. There's no purpose of checking it. It's treif, because an adhesion is a sign of a hole. Once there's a hole there, and the two lobes of the lungs are connected, so there's a hole in the lungs, either way, there's a hole somewhere, then it's a problem. And once there's a hole, then even if it scabs over, it's still treif. To that, Rav Nechemya, Breder of Yosef, Badalat B'Pshuri. To that, Rav Nechemya said, check it in water. Do the water test. Meaning that even though you said treif, do the water test. If there's no bubbles, then it's fine. To that, the Gemara points out, Maskla Ravashi asks a kasha that he doesn't respond to, which is, Hai Mai, I don't understand. Bishlem Ahacha Tlin B'Dayfin Kshera. In the first version, we know there's a hole because there's an adhesion, but I could always rely on the fact that maybe the hole developed in the rib cage. Once there's a hole in the rib cage, then you're fine, because there's no issue of a hole in the rib cage. So you always have that to rely on, coupled with checking it with the water test. No, it's fine. But over here, but over here, the two lobes of the lungs are adhered to each other, which means there's a hole in the lungs either way. Maybe in this lobe, maybe in that lobe. It doesn't make a difference. So what is the water going to do? And therefore, he doesn't answer that. Now, the Gemara said before that according to Rabbi Nachman, if there's a puncture, if the lung is adhering to the rib cage, and I believe that there's a hole in the lung, that's an issue. The whole heter is that I could check the rib cage and I see discoloration or something in the rib cage, just to assume that the hole developed in the rib cage. But if the hole developed in the lung, you have a problem. Is that true? Did Rabbi Nachman say that a hole in the lung, between the lung and the rib cage, a hole in the lung would be a problem? Didn't Rabbi Nachman himself say that if there's a hole in the lungs, but it's in an area where the lungs and the rib cage touch, then the rib cage seals it up? Meaning, we have a stira in Rabbi Nachman. The first version of Rabbi Nachman is that if there's a hole in the lungs, if I know the lungs have a hole in it by the rib cage, that's a problem. The whole heter is the fact that I could assume the rib cage has the hole, but if the hole is in the lungs, that's a problem. But this version of Rabbi Nachman is that if there's a hole in the lungs, but it's sealed up naturally by the rib cage, it's fine. We had a similar concept to this recently, that sometimes if holes develop, but it's naturally sealed, like like we said, the gallbladder has a hole. But if it's at the area where the liver pushes against it, then the liver is itself a natural sealant, and that's fine. Whatever the lumdus is. The point is, and it's hard to understand the lumdus, but you have a few times where if HaKadosh Baruch Hu made it in an area where the hole developed, but it's in an area that there was a natural sealant, that for whatever reason, we never look at it as a real hole in halacha. It's hard to understand in lumdus, but that's the truth. So the point is, we have a stira. One point he said if there's a hole in the lungs by the rib cage, it's a problem. The other time he said that the rib cage is a natural sealant, and it's fine. So how do you reconcile this? So you have to know, this next few lines, you have to really know the anatomy of an animal. Loi kasha, hasa b'makam revisa, hacha shaloi b'makam revisa. The answer is, where the lungs and the rib cage touch, there are some areas where it's very, very tight. and the lungs can be mamish sealed by the rib cage. If that's an area where the hole developed, it's fine. What he was talking about before was that the lungs and the rib cage are connected, but they're not super sealed. I guess there's a little bit of air in between. So in that case, I know there's an adherence, but it's not naturally sealed. To that, then it would be a problem if there was a hole in the lungs. Again, it's just different parts of the rib cage are a little tighter and different parts are a little bit looser. Says the Gemara, the Heicha Makom Revisa, and where is an area where the lungs and the rib cage are naturally very tight with each other? Chitucha deuni, it's by the area of the lobes of the lung. That's apparently where it's very, very tight. It's held very, very tight. In such a situation, even if there was a hole in the lungs, the rib cage would be a natural sealant and it would be okay. This is, by the way, it's an interesting thing because even according to Rashi, we've had, this is a chiddush. You mentioned it, it's a good point to point it out. You do have, according to Rashi, every adhesion, every sircha is a hole, is a sign of a hole. But we also saw that if there are two lobes that are adjacent to each other and there's a sircha, it's fine. Why? Because it's sealed. So you do see from here that sometimes a hole that's sealed is a problem because it's scabbed over, but sometimes a natural sealant is okay. And you have to know exactly the lumdis of when it's okay, when it's not okay. Says the Gemara, Gufa, Rav Yosef, Rav Nachman, Reya Shenikva v'Daifen Sesmashay. This is we just referenced this, that if you have a hole in the lungs, but it's in an area where the rib cage is very tight with the lungs, it's kosher. Ravina, V'hu Desabich Bebisra. Ravina points out, by the way, it has to be by the rib cage. We've eaten ribs before, so ribs have meat and they have bone. It has to be that the hole is by the meat, not the bone. The meat is a little bit more it'll get tighter into the hole, and it'll be more of a sealant as opposed to the bones, which are a little bit more rigid, and therefore it won't seal as well. Says the Gemara, Amalei Rav Yosef Ravina, v'loi sabich mai, but let's say it's not perfectly against the meat of the rib cage, treifa. So alma amrina nekuvehi. Ihachi ki sabich nami. So the Gemara is a very interesting, I'll say it outside, it's very interesting, and then we'll see it inside. Very interesting question. You pointed out that if there's a hole, but it's naturally sealed, it's okay. Now that doesn't bother us because, okay, there are some times. The Gemara, though, is asking the following thing. We have a concept, holes come up in a few areas of halacha. Treifus, obviously, is like major where there's holes. Another area is by krushuvcha. I'm not going to go into the details too much, it's early in the morning, but if a man has problems in that area of the body, so the zera doesn't come out normally, if let's say there's a hole in that area, so the zera is coming out through the hole, that would make him a krushuvcha, which would make him not be allowed to marry a regular Yisraelis. Now, the Gemara over there says that if he had a hole in that area, so it's a problem, but then it heals. Either naturally, I guess surgery, but let's go naturally. It naturally heals. The hole heals. The Gemara says, then it's fine. Implying that's the only time where a hole that's healed is fine. But wait a minute, you just told me that if the lungs have a hole and then it's naturally sealed up by the ribs, it's okay. It's an interesting question. The Gemara is saying, let's see it inside. The Gemara says, Ihachi ki savach nami, I don't understand, Tanya. Don't we have a brisa regarding that part of the body of the male anatomy? Nikiv puzzle. That if he has a hole in that area, so the zera is not coming out of the normal area of the male anatomy, it's coming through the hole, then he's pasul lava kahol b'nei shehu shaisis, because the zera just drips out. Imply, and then the brisa says nistam. But if that hole is sealed, kosher, neshu moilid, because now he's back to being a normal, healthy person. Says the Gemara, the zeu psul shechayz l'kshere. The brisa ends off. This is the only time that a hole that's sealed is fine. This is the only time. What is it implying? Dafka by the male anatomy. Do you seal a hole? Is it fine? But by treifus, if a hole that gets sealed up, it's a problem. But wait a minute, you just told me that if there's a hole and it's up against the rib cage, it's fine. So how could you tell me that by treifus? You said dafka by the male anatomy, that's the only time that a sealed hole is okay. Implying that by treifus, it's not okay. But you just told me a case by a lungs where there was a hole and it was sealed and you're fine. So don't tell me that by the male anatomy, it's the only time. That's not true. By the lungs as well. So why is it that the brisa ends off by the male anatomy? This is the time where a sealed hole is okay, implying that by treifus it's not okay. Says the Gemara, "V'zel l'mute mai lav l'mute kai gavna." Is it not referring to our case? Meaning the brisa is trying to tell you that there's a case of treifus where a hole being sealed up is a problem. Because it says dafka by, in male anatomy, the hole that's sealed up is kosher, implying that by treifus it's a problem. What's the case by treifus? Pashas, our case. We have a hole in the lungs, but it's sealed up naturally by the ribs, and it's saying it's a problem. So the Gemara says, no. You know what it's talking about? Your classic case. Let's say you have a hole in the lung straight here. Not by the ribs. Stam. Straight. And then it scabs over. Everyone agrees that's a treifa. It's sealed. It's a problem. So the answer is like this. It's not addressing our case. If there's a hole in an area where it's natural sealant with the ribs, that's fine. What is it referring to when it says that by trephus, a hole that's sealed is a problem? The classic case. A hole in the lungs, not by the rib cage, that just gets scabbed over naturally, it heals by itself, and that's a treifa. And that's universally a treifa. Not talking about this obscure case which is naturally sealed up by the rib cage. It's talking about stama case. The Gemara says, "Lie, limit krum shalom machas makabriya deina krum." It's talking about your standard case of a hole in the lungs that gets scabbed over. That's not a good sealant, but by the krushufcha, by the male anatomy, it is a good sealant. Okay. Masklav amar ukva bar chama. Okay, so the Gemara has a very interesting question. Again, I'm just going to say it outside. We'll see it all outside. You have a hole in the lungs, right? And then it's connected by the rib cage. So we said before, right? We said before that the rib cage naturally seals it. Let's say there's a hole by the lungs, and then straight through that spot of the rib cage. Then it's a problem, because there's no sealant, obviously, right? If there's a hole here, and then it lines up and there's a hole in the rib cage, that's for sure a problem. So the Gemara says, Akasha, that means that you found the case. Again, I think if you're thinking, you'll see this is not true. But the Gemara says, is this not a case where there's a hole in the rib cage and it's a treifa? When the Mishnah lists holes, it never mentions the rib cage. It mentions the gallbladder, mentions the liver, the heart, the lungs. But over here, that's a hole in the rib cage. The Gemara, obviously, I think you got the answer. I can already tell you. The Gemara is going to say, I'll just say the cheshbon. The Gemara is saying, wait, if there's a hole in the lungs, and it seals up, then it's fine. But if there's a hole in that rib cage, then it's a problem. Oh, so that means that you found a case where a hole in the rib cage is a problem. So why isn't it listed? And the Gemara is answering, which is what you said. I can see it in your mind. It's not a hole in the rib cage that's a problem. It's when there's a hole in the rib cage and it's not sealing the lungs. The hole in the lungs is the problem. There is no case where a hole in the rib cage is an issue bifnei atzmai. It's that, yes, if the rib cage would be a good Band-Aid, then it'd be fine. When over here it's not a good Band-Aid, that just reveals the hole in the lungs to be an issue. But it's not a new category of holes. It's yet another case of a hole in the lungs. So let's just see it inside. The Gemara says, "Ilu inkiv v'doifin lahada." But let's say there was a hole in the rib cage by that spot, treifa. So wait a minute, listening to kuvas hadoifin. So why is this not listed as a case of when the Mishnah is listing holes that are a problem? It should list a hole in the rib cage because I found a case where a hole in the rib cage is a treifa. And the Gemara says no. Wait, according to you. We had this a few days ago. We had a case that if the gallbladder gets a hole, we said it's a treifa. But if the gallbladder gets a hole and the liver seals it up naturally, then it's kosher. Now let me ask you the same question. If there was a hole in the liver by that spot, it would be a treifa. Oh, so you see that a hole in the liver is a treifa? No. The hole in the liver is not the treifa. It's that the hole in the liver is that now we cannot seal up the gallbladder. But it's the gallbladder that's the problem. So to over here, there is no case of a hole in the ribcage being a treifa b'fnei atzmai. It's that the hole in the lungs is the problem. Normally the ribcage is a good Band-Aid, but if there's a hole in the ribcage, then it's not a good Band-Aid, revealing that original hole in the lungs. But it's not a new category. So says the Gemara, "Ilu inkiv kavid lahada my treifa," listening to kuvas hakavid, ela kikin nikva delav minei mitra lekatani. It's not a case of a treifa of the rib cage. It's that the rib cage is no longer a good sealant for the lungs. It's the lungs that are the issue, and the lungs being an issue is already addressed in the Mishnah. The Gemara continues. The next Gemara is a little bit easy, and then we'll go to an interesting discussion. What if the lung has blisters on top, no holes, just pus-filled blisters? That's not a hole. I don't know what blisters develop. Some, I guess, rubbing, friction, but blisters. So says the Gemara, Amalek Shera, it's kosher. It's not a hole. A blister, even though it's filled with pus, okay, it's not a hole. It doesn't sound healthy to eat, but okay, it's fine. Amalek Afani Aimerkain, I agree with you, says Rabbi Chana. Elisha Talmidim Minadzin Bedavar. He said the problem is I say this over in Shir that if there's a pus-filled blister on a lung, my students make me crazy. What are the students making crazy? Because the students say to them, Dam Rav Masna, they quote Rav Masna, that said, Malya Mugla Treifa, if the blisters are filled with pus, it's a treifa, mayim zaken shera. If it's filled with a watery liquid, then it's fine. In other words, Rav Masna said that if you have pus-filled blisters, it's a problem. So he said, so I'm saying over in Shir that it's okay, but they're quoting me Rav Masna who disagrees with me. So he responded, Amar le'ahi bekuchla itman. He says, no. When Rav Masna said that if it's a pus-filled blister, it's a problem, he was not referring to the lungs. He was referring to the kidneys. Lungs, it's fine. If there's blisters on the lungs, that's fine, even if they're filled with pus. Where Rav Masna was saying it's a problem, he was talking about the kidneys, not the lungs. The Gemara says the following conversation: Ma'isa Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef have a causal based Rav Yirmiyah b'shuk at the tavchi. Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef was traveling with Rav Yirmiyah in the shuk, a butcher shuk. Chazanu lahanach the kaimin simchi tzimchi. They pass by these lungs in the window that are filled with blisters, full of pus. So Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef wants to know if Rav Yirmiyah holds it's a problem. So what do? You ask him, you want to buy some? Meaning he's trying to get him into a conversation. What do you think of this? Instead of asking, is this kosher? He says to him, Amar lei boy marumza, don't you want? Well, buy some meat. Let's buy this, because he's trying to see if he would purchase it. So Amar lei, let's look pretty. I don't have the money right now. Amar lei akman, I'll lend you the money. Amar lei my avidlach. Rav Yitzchak, now Rav Yirmiyah explained to him, I know what you're trying to do, but my avidlach. What do you want me to do? I know there are poskim that are makel. I know that Rav Shimon is makel. Rav Shimon Elazar is makel. Rav Shimon is makel. But I don't. Meaning, in other words, he was trying to avoid getting into like a conversation about conflict. And he's like, so he personally held that pus-filled blisters on lungs is a problem. He knew that those that are makel. So when Rav Yitzchak says, you want to buy it? He's like, nah, I'm not hungry. Because he didn't want to get into I hold it's a problem. I know, but eventually he's pushing. He's like, I get it. There are those that are makel. I personally don't hold that it's I hold that it's a problem, and I won't eat these animals. The Gemara says, Amar Rava ki hava sagirno kamid b'asei Nachman. Rava says, when I would walk behind Rabbi Nachman b'shuka, go to the next page, de Gildoi, in the shuka Gildoi. Amri la b'shuk de Rabbanon. Some say it was the shuk de Rabbanon, different places. Chazu hanach dekaimi kandi. I saw lungs that were filled with blisters that were size of like bags. And he didn't say anything, meaning, and if he held that as a treifa, he would tell them to take it down as a mashkiach. Ravami v'Ravasi have a chalfit b'shukah de Tiveria. They were traveling the shukah Tiveria. Chazu dahani kaimi tindi. He saw these blisters on the lungs that were size of stones. And he didn't say anything. Obviously, he felt that it's not a treifa. Okay, now what here we're going to do until the end of the daf. It's not very challenging. It's over here. Case is, you have a needle that is inside the lungs. You find the needle inside the lungs. And the question is, how did it get there? There's two options. Either it went from the stomach. Most needles in the animal ate. Now, if it went through the stomach, how did it get to the lungs? The answer is, it went through the stomach, it left the stomach, because it's a needle, and went into the lungs. And that's a treifa. Or the animal swallowed it through the trachea, meaning it inhaled the needle, and actually didn't puncture anything. It just went straight into the lungs. Those are the two choices. So it says the Gemara, Itmar, if you find a needle inside the lungs, Rav Yochanan, Rav Elazar, Rav Chanina, Machashri, they're mekel, they say it's kosher, Vrish Lakish, Vermani Bar Patish, Shimon El Yokum Trefi, they hold that it's treif. Now, what is the machlokas based on? So the Gemara at first understands. Lema B'Hakam Miflagi. The Gemara first understands like this. Both agree that we assume that the needle did not go from the stomach to the lungs. Let's assume that everyone's on the same page. The animal inhaled the needle. So what's the machlokas about? Mar savar chisar mibifnim shmei chisaron, umar savar loy shmei chisaron. We had this yesterday. Is an internal issue with the animal, but the internal issue of the organ, but the outside of the organ is completely intact. Is that an issue? Meaning, we assume that the needle, let's go with the presumption, the needle did not go, it went through the lungs. Didn't go through the digestive tract, straight through the lungs. So what's the problem? Needles inside is probably ripping apart the inside of the lungs a little bit, decaying it a little bit, it's scratching it a little bit. So now the lungs on the inside are a little bit deficient. They hold that's a problem. Chisaron mibifnim shmei chisaron. Internal decay is an issue, and the other person disagree. Because if you hold an internal decay as a problem, it's a treifa. Because I don't care how the needle got there. The needle is definitely doing damage. A needle inside the lungs is definitely doing damage. If you hold internal damage as a treifa, then it's a problem. So that seems to be the machlokas. And the Gemara says, no. No, both opinions agree that internal decay is not a problem. So wait a minute. If it's not a problem, then what's the machlokas over here? The answer is, this is what the machlokas is what I said before. Really, if you hold internal decay as a problem, it's a treifa, no question, because I don't care how it got there. Right now, it's causing chaos. The answer is, everyone holds the internal decay is not a chisaron. So what's the machlokas? The machlokas is, how did the needle get there? Reish Lakish holds that it's a treifa because we assume the needle went from the digestive tract, because that's how needles generally get into the animal, through being eaten. It went through the digestive tract all the way to the lungs, and it pierced through, and it's a treifa. And Rabbi Yochanan says, no, maybe the animal just swallowed it through the trachea, not swallowed through the esophagus. It inhaled it through the nose, and it went into the lungs. The Gemara says, "The kuli alma chasar mefneim lo yishmei chisaron. V'hacha bagam mivli mar saver simpuna nakavasi mar saver nekuvi nakavasi." One opinion that it pierced through the digestive tract. Now, other opinion says that it went through the lungs. Now, the Gemara says you have machlekes over here. Now, this case is where the animal's lungs are intact. So, in addition to the possibility that it just went through the trachea, I don't see any punctures.
How would you see it? It's a needle.
But at least you could fill it up with the water. You could see there's no holes. Something. Now, normally that's not the best tactic, but at least it's something. The Gemara says the following case: Hahi machta dishtake b'chitucha derei. This is almost a similar case. They found the needle, but this lungs were cut up. So now it's a little bit worse because now you can't even test it. Meaning they cut up the lungs, and all of a sudden they find the needle in there. So it's the exact same case, but the lungs are not intact, so you can't even play the game of testing it. So it's a little bit worse. So says the Gemara, they brought their lungs in front of Rav Ami. Well, he wanted to say it's kosher, like we had before. There's those opinions. But they said like this. Let me say it outside. They said like this. We said before that if you hold chisar mebifnim shmei chisaron, internal decay is a problem, it's a treifa no matter what. The whole heter is if you hold internal decay is not a chisaron, and then you could rely that it went through the nose. So says the Gemara, don't we hold that internal decay is a chisaron? Because it says, didn't it say in the Mishnah, Hareya shenikva ishachasra? We had this yesterday. The lungs are punctured or chasra. What's the difference between chasra and nikva? My chasra, ileme bebachutz, hainu nikva, elam mibfnim. Isn't chasra mibfnim? That nikva is from the outside, chasra is internal decay, and you see internal decay is a treifa. Shmamina chisar mifnim shmei chisaron. Now, the reason why that's not the strongest proof is if you remember yesterday's daf, the Gemara rejected this by saying that chisaron is not internal decay, chisaron is outside, but the difference is that nikva is that it has to hit the bronchi, and chisaron means that if it's actually missing some of the flesh, even if it didn't hit the bronchi. But there's a possibility that this means an internal decay is a problem. The Gemara, though, they weren't confident about this proof. Then they sent the lung to Rav Yitzchak Nafcha. Savar Lachshuri, he wanted to say it's kosher. The Gemara says, Eis Rav Yirmiyah. Rav Yirmiyah then asked this question. It said, Hareya shenikva shechasra. My chasra ilaim b'chutz hanu nikva. Elam mefrin shramina chisar mefrin shmei chisaron. So they're going back and forth. Is an internal decay a problem? Is this a proof? Then they sent it to Rav Ami. V'tarfa, he said it's treif. Now, what about the fact that we said before that there were many opinions that held that if you find the needle in the lungs, you could be lenient? So I told you before, this is worse. Why? Because it's cut up. So he spoke that out. Amri lei, the Rabbanan said to Rav Ami, Rabbanan machsharei. I thought the Rabbanan that say that it's fine if you find needles in the lung, because you could assume that it went through the nose. So Amr Lahan, Rav Ami said, Hey, in hechshiru sheyoydemei zatam hechshiru. They were makel because they had reason to be makel. In other words, the lung was intact. So you could at least check and you could presume that it was not punctured. But anon meizatam nachshir. But for us, why would I be makel? Dilma ihave reya kaman minkava. Maybe if it was in front of me, it would be punctured. In other words, Gavin, you might make it a little bit colder in here. Just lower the air conditioner just 1 degree. I'm super hot. He said over here, because it's cut up, it's a problem. So says the Gemara, Taima delesa. One quick question. One quick point. The first case is where the needle was found in the lungs. In the lungs, there's a thing called bronchi. Bronchi are like the highways. If the needle is found within the bronchi, then I get where there's a possibility it went through the nose. This case, not only was it cut up, which is itself a problem, but it was actually found in the spongy material of the lungs. So isn't it a treifa because it went through the bronchi into the spongy area? So forget about, you understand what I'm saying? Meaning, forget about the fact that it went through the nose, I get it, but it also left the bronchi to go into the spongy area of the lungs. Again, you didn't find it in the highway, you found it in the spongy area. So forget about the fact that it went through the nose, but it left the bronchi, it punctured the bronchi to go through the spongy area. Oh, huh?
Why is that not in time of decay?
Oh, so says the Gemara, Taima delesa isalei minker shera, Hom Rav Nachman hay simpuna deredin kav treifa. But isn't it a treifa when the bronchi itself are punctured? Means over here, it went through the bronchi. It definitely went through the bronchi. Even it went through the nose. How did it get to the spongy area of the lung? It went through the bronchi. It punctured it. So isn't that a treifa b'fnei atzmai? So the Gemara says no. Hahu lechaveri itmar. Puncturing the bronchi is not a treifa. It's only a treifa if the bronchi are punctured two next to each other and there's no spongy area to sealant. Meaning if I have the bronchi over here and it's right next to the spongy area and there's a hole, then the spongy area is a natural sealant. The treifa is where two bronchi are next to each other and there's a puncture between the two so that they're not a natural sealant. That's when it's a treifa. So in this case, it punctured the bronchi, but it went straight into the spongy area, and the spongy area is a natural sealant to the hole. So, but if there's two bronchi that are next to each other, that there's a puncture, that's a problem. Says the Gemara, again, the Gemara says, I don't understand. If you have two intestines that are punctured, it's a sealant and it's fine. But two bronchi that punctured is a problem, what's the difference? So says the Gemara, Ha'amar of Nachman, Hai Hadura de Kinta de Inkiv Lahadi Chavri Magin Aleha. But if you have the intestines that puncture against each other, the two walls of the intestines are a natural sealant for each other. So how come the two bronchi that get a puncture, it's not a sealant? So the Gemara says, you can't compare anatomy. It doesn't work like that. You can't say because the intestines it works one way, then the bronchi works the other. They're two different organs. That's the rules of treifa. You can't compare the two. Says the Gemara, Amar Avashi, treifas kamadami hadadi. You're trying to compare treifas to each other. You can't compare different parts of the body. It doesn't work like that. I'll prove it to you. If you have a leg of the animal and you cut above the knee, it'll die. Below the knee, it's fine. You'll say, but it's the same knee. The answer is, that's how anatomy works. Different parts of the body have different reactions. So taka, if you have two intestines that make a hole, it'll seal it. But two bronchi that make a hole, it won't seal it. Okay? Let me see this. The Gemara says, now, just to finish up, a few more minutes, about 5 more minutes. The Gemara says, just to finish up the daf, there was a needle that was found in the main bronchial artery, the main one. So not only was it found in the lungs, it was found in the main artery. So the Gemara says that's going to be fine. Why? Because most likely, if it went through the nose, because it went to the main one. We had a shiloh before it was found in a separate one. So meaning like this, we had a shiloh before if the needle was found in different parts of the lungs, but when it's found in the main bronchial area, the main artery of the lungs, that mistama, it went through the nose. Says the Gemara, the Rabbanan said that it's a treifa, but the Gemara says, no, I'm sorry, he brought it to the Rabbanan who normally say there's a treifa when there's a needle found in the lungs, meaning the original Rabbanan, Rish Lakish, and those Rabbanan who said that it's a treifa if you find the needle in the lungs, he brought this case where the needle is found in the main bronchial artery, and they said, they refused to paskin. They said, they didn't want to say that it's mutter because they themselves are generally strict when a needle is found in the lungs. But isanami lo amri, but they also didn't want to say it's treif. Kivan de sapuna Rabbi ishtakah, because you found in the main bronchial artery emes sapuna nakavasa. It's more likely that it went through that method as opposed to other cases. Meaning, even though they're machmer normally. 2 more minutes. Even though they're machmer normally if you find a needle in the lungs, but if you find in the main bronchial artery, that's most likely it went through the nose and therefore it didn't pierce anything. The Gemara says, they found a needle in the liver. Now, how to get there? Okay, so that's the question. So says the Gemara, Savar Marbre de Ravina Lemitrave, Marbre Ravina said, it's treif. Now let me ask you a question. Puncturing the liver is not a treif. So who cares that there's a needle in the liver? You could puncture the liver. Puncturing the liver is not a treif. So why do you say it's treif? Just because there's a needle there, you're going to say it's treif? Why are you saying it's treif? So the Gemara says like this. I'll tell you why he said it's treif. How did the needle get there? How did a needle get in the liver? There's two choices. It either went from the stomach, pierced the stomach, went through the stomach, and punctured the liver. That would be a treif. Or it went from the nose into the lungs, into the liver somehow. So he says like this, Here's my solution. Again, puncturing the liver is not a problem. Just the question is, how did the needle get there? So he said like this: Ela Omer Rav Ashi, Chazinan ikufa labar nekuve nakivasi. Where is the pointy part? If the pointy part is piercing the liver, that means that it came from outside and was pierced in, right? But if the head of the needle is inside the liver and the pointy part is sticking out, then we assume that it went through the liver and came out. Just practically, you have to basically look at the pointy part of the needle and say, well, listen, if the pointy part of the needle is sticking out, it's most likely that it went that way. If the pointy part of the needle is sticking in, it most likely went inside. We don't say that maybe it was from inside the liver and the head of the needle shot out. No, you follow the pointy way. Says the Gemara, we'll just finish up. Ikufa lagav sampuna, huh?
Why don't we say that with the lungs?
Oh, so we're going to get to that in a second. Ikufa lagav sampuna nakava. By the way, this is only true with a large needle. When it comes to a small needle, then it doesn't matter pointy side or not. Either way, it's going to be a treif because it flies. Small needles just fly, so we assume it came from the stomach. And with this is Gavin's question, not from the lungs. The question is from the intestines. The Gemara says, the halacha is that if you find a needle in the intestines, here's the halacha. If it's only sticking out one side, it's kosher because it didn't penetrate through and through. But if it went through both stomach linings, it's a problem. By the stomach, it doesn't matter whether it's the pointy side, it doesn't matter whether it's the thick side. We say it's flying out. Meaning if I have a stomach lining where the pointy side is inside and the head of it is outside, we say that it shot out. It doesn't matter. We don't care about which direction it is. We always say it flew through the walls. So why is that by the liver we say it depends where the pointy side is, but not by the stomach lining? So it says the Gemara, Amri, Hasam kivan deika uchlan umashkin, ema uchlan umashkin dachu. The answer is the stomach, because it has digestion, it has a little more force and acid. It's possible that the acid shot the needle out. So it doesn't matter which side it is. It could be the pointy, it could be the non-pointy. Even the non-pointy can shoot through. By the liver, how is the non-pointy side shooting through? You follow the pointy side only. We'll stop here. Whew.